Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're calling in from. Today I'm joining Ted Pattison. He's actually usually does our embedded what's up and kind of the developer walkthroughs. And he said he's been doing that for the last three calls, and he wanted to try something a little bit different and walk you through what does it look like to create Power BI custom controls. Pretty popular topic. A lot of people have been asking about that.
Custom visuals.
Sorry, what?
You mixed up your C's and your V's. They're custom visuals. Custom controls are some other technology.
Oh yeah. So So me and Todd came from a .NET framework background and a Visual Basic background. So creating OCXs and VBXs from back in the day. I'm dating myself, us with the gray hair. So thank you for that. So that's what we're looking for. So Ted, why don't you go ahead and share your desktop and see if we can actually see your screen. And if you're going to do slides, look at the slides and tell us a little bit about who Ted Pattison is. What are we going to look at today? Who Critical Path Training is, and what are we doing next week? I think we're getting together.
Well, my name is Ted Pattison. I'm a user of Microsoft technologies. I've been that way for quite a few decades. Couple things to note. I run a training company, which is Critical Path Training. Let me go ahead and see if I can kind of move over here. PowerPoint is giving me a hard time here. Probably never happened to you before. But if I go back over here, Critical Path Training is a company that I have, and I've been doing a lot of training over the years. SharePoint was a real big thing for us back in 2007 to 2012. And since then, we've kind of moved into Power BI, now what has become the Power Platform space. I've always felt at home teaching developers. So I've been writing code since the early 90s. We have a couple different classes if you like what we're doing here today. We have a Power BI Developer Bootcamp, which is a 4-day training class. We also have just the skinny on just Power BI embedding. So we have a 2-day workshop developing with Power BI embedding. Also, next week, Chuck, I think this is what you're referring to, we are having in Tampa the Power BI Power Platform World Tour. Chuck and I are going to be doing quite a few sessions, and we're pretty excited about that.
Yes, we are.
So was that the background on myself you were hoping for?
Everything I'd ever dreamed of. Right there, you got it.
Well, very good. Okay, why don't we go ahead and start up. Note that there are sample slides, and the demo files that I'm going to show are available to all. So if I go back out here and I get rid of this propaganda website and go back to Critical Path Training /custom visuals, which is at github.com, what you'll see is that there are the slides. Here are the demo files that I'm going to be showing today. Just wanted everyone to be able to get their hands on things. Okay, let's go ahead and go back to the slide deck. Charles, you promised to chime in when you think I'm lying. Keep me honest with these folks.
Not a chance. That's never going to happen because you don't lie.
Okay, I don't lie. Everything I've said is a lie, and that's the truth, damn it. Okay, let's go ahead and start out. Now, when we use custom visuals, one of the things you have to do is you have to embrace this new set of tools. So I'm going to go through and step through the tools. The other thing is that I wanted to talk about some of the new things that are coming down the road with respect to the developer tools we're about to look at. But Charles is also saying you have something for new people who are just kind of into the game fresh. So probably the first half, we'll look at some of the fundamentals. And so for people who have never dealt with custom visual development before, building their skills, but as we get to the end, some things for people who have been working with this for a while. In particular, there's a new beta version of the tools, the V3 version of the Power BI tools. So at the end, we're going to look at that, and that's going to allow us to get to the latest version of D3, which is D3 version 5, which has been the holy grail for many of the custom visual developers. Okay, now, first thing we need to do is install this environment called Nodejs. I know some of you have been working with it. Others have heard about it but haven't gotten into it. We're going to be doing a lot with Nodejs. Now, when you program with Nodejs, you leave Visual Studio and what's for many of you, your classic development experience behind, and you have to pick another editor. Now, Visual Studio Code is one potential editor. It's the one made by Microsoft specifically for this style of development. Okay, but when you use Node.js, you get to pick your own environment. And because I'm brainwashed Microsoft through and through, I'm obviously going to use their tool. Okay, now we have to install the Power BI developer tools, still in version 2. And when you install this, you're going to install it via the Node Package Manager, which is a command line driven utility that gets installed with Node.js. We'll see all that in just a second. And finally, we're going to have to create a local self-signed certificate so that when I run my custom visuals in the local debugger, they can basically be served up via localhost with an HTTPS address instead of HTTP, which is very valuable because if you're not using HTTPS, you can't basically debug with Power BI in the cloud. Okay, so you can go and install Node.js. I'm not going to walk through how to do that, but you basically go there. Note that the latest version is version 10. I'm doing some work with the SharePoint framework, and it's not the Power BI folks, it's the SharePoint framework folks that all of a sudden did something where you can't use the later versions of Node.js, 9 or 10, you have to use 8. So I'm going to be using 8 today, but it really doesn't matter which version that you're using, as long as you're not using 1 or 2. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to install Node.js. I've already installed that on my machine. And after you install Node.js, you basically have this command line. And here you can see that I have Node.js 8.14.1. One other thing to note about Node.js is if I bring up the Windows Start menu and I type in Node, what we want to be able to work with is the Node.js command prompt, not down here where it says Node.js. If you bring this up, this is this engine that you're able just to submit raw JavaScript requests against. That's not what we want. We never interact with the actual Node.js console. We're going to be dealing with the Node.js command prompt. Okay, so what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to install the tool set. Now, the way that you can install the tool set, is simply by, if I come up to the command prompt right here, and I go ahead and I put in something, such as npm install -g, because it's a global install. You're not installing it into a particular project. You're going to install this, and there's going to be a templating mechanism where you can create new projects. Okay, so let's go ahead and install this. Note that the current version that came out about a month ago is 2.3. At the end of the session, we're going to be installing the beta version, which is going to move into the 3 range. Okay, but for now, we're going to use the latest released version of these particular tools. Now, once you do that, you have this tool, which is called PBI Viz. Note that I can just type PBI Viz right from the command prompt. And let's say I type something like, -v, and that gives me the ability to kind of show what version. If I type PBI Viz and I just enter without any command line parameters, you can see what it does is it returns back the different commands that are available to me. 2 of the commands that I'm going to have to run first are these 2 down below, create cert and install cert. Okay, so let's say that I come back here and I'm ready to kind of almost do my first demo. But now we're going to call PBI Viz, and hyphen gets to be a really big thing in the Node.js world. So hyphen, and here's our parameter, install -cert. Now, when we run this command right here, what we're going to be doing right here, PBI Viz and PBI Viz, and I think I had that command wrong inside there. So one more time, we're going to have the create cert command. Okay, once we do this, it's basically going to generate a certificate. Now, in an earlier version of the tools, they just would have one command to create and install. For various reasons and customer asks, they decide to split it out into 2. So the first thing that you do is you run the create, and notice that there's a little passphrase that you're going to need. So now we're going to say PBI Viz hyphen, and now we're going to say install cert. And when we do that, it now kind of leads you through this process right here. I'm going to do this fairly quickly. It knows when it brings up this dialog and wizard experience, where that certificate is that it just created, what is the password. I'm just going to copy that to the clipboard, paste that inside there, go ahead and click next. And then finally, we're going to take our certificate and we're going to place it here in the trusted root certificate authorities. And at this point, I'll go ahead and click finish. A couple buyer beware messages come up because it's something you want to do on a development machine, not a production machine. Okay, and at this point, we've kind of been through the process of installing the certificate. Now, we're also going to be using Visual Studio Code. So Visual Studio Code is free. It's a very quick, easy download. You can download it and install it in just a matter of 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, now with code, we're going to be able to open up our projects and start working with them. And once again, Visual Studio, not Visual Studio Code, but the old classic Visual Studio that you and me and Chuck have been using, since the 40s, has issues with Node.js style development because it wants to have all kinds of project files, where Node.js is really all about every utility gets its own specially named files, and really the folder is our main structure. And so Visual Studio Code was kind of created around the philosophy how Node.js works and many other cross-platform tools. And Visual Studio, just isn't a good fit for what we're about to do. Now, what we just did is we went through and we looked at installing the Power BI tools, developer tools. Some people call it, PBI Viz, because generally that's what gets installed. Now, once we have PBI Viz, this is going to be the command utility that we use to create a new project and to basically spin up a project and run it inside the local debugger. Now, I just walked you through creating a cert, installing the cert. You kind of saw that once you install the cert, you have to know to go through this process of pick current user, you have the file, you have to copy and paste the password inside there, and then put it in the trusted root, and you're good to go. Okay. But what you'll find is if you don't do this and you start bringing things up inside of the browser, they just don't work. You can look inside of Fiddler and kind of see that you have an SSL handshake error that occurred. Okay. Well, now let's create our first visual. Now, what you're going to see is that PBI Viz is going to be available to us from the command line. So let's do this. Let's go back here, and we're going to go over to our custom visual folder. So once I get over to our custom visuals folder, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to call PBI Viz new. And then what's going to be the name of my first project? Let's just do Hello D3. So the idea is that this now creates a new project. It creates a folder in the same directory that I was already in. So if I say CD and I type H and go over to hello, well, now I can see dir, I can see what's inside there. Okay, now let me go ahead and collapse that. Now, at this point, I want to get out of just working at the command line and bring up Visual Studio Code. So when I type code space dot, it says start up Visual Studio Code and open the current folder. And now here is my new project right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of take a look at some of these files here. What are the purposes of these? If I look inside of the SRC, you can see that there's a visual.ts, there's a settings.ts, and under style, there's a visual.less. Okay, let's go back to the slides for a second. Now, once we've created this new project, first of all, you have a package.json file. So that's the main project file used to manage projects in Node.js. So anytime we're using Node Package Manager, and we're always using Node Package Manager when we're creating custom visuals, you have a package.json file. Now, we also have a file that's specific to the custom visual framework, which is the PBI viz.json file. And a bunch of settings go inside there. There's a capabilities.json file, which is used to define visual capabilities. Things like what are the fields that I want to map into my custom visual, other things such as what are the custom properties. So those are all defined in a JSON format inside this file. And then finally, you have a couple files that are just meant to assist the TypeScript compiler, as it compiles the TypeScript in your project into the JavaScript output that we use to distribute our custom visual. Okay, now what's inside the PBI Viz file? Let's go back over here and let's go to my PBI Viz file. Well, first of all, let's open up the package.json file. package.json file is pretty minimal. It's got the visual name, which is just visual. That's original. And it's got dependencies. And you can see when you create a new project, they might add 1 or 2 dependencies. This has changed quite a bit as the tools have gone from 1.2 to 1.5 to 1.10 to 2.3 that we're at now. They've got if you've used the SharePoint framework, you're going to see that this is just so much cleaner and so much easier. With the SharePoint framework, every time you do anything, there are hundreds of packages, inside your project. And now it's kind of nice. If I look at node modules, they didn't have to put very many things. They just put this one extra package inside there. Now let's open up the PBI viz file. So this is something that is inspected as the tools build the visual. So they have things like, what is the name of the visual class? It's named visual. If you go back and you take your class and you name it something else, note that you then have to also, update what is inside of the PBI viz file, just to make sure that the class name that you use and what's inside the PBI viz JSON file are the same. Now, it also references the version of the API inside there. Now, this is version 2. At the very end, we're going to talk about version 3. But what's important to see is that in version 2 of the tools, the code for the API just gets added directly into your project. And then the API version, inside here can have multiple things inside. Okay. Just as, for instance, if you have an earlier version, you're using API 1.10.0, you can call PBI viz update, put in the version number you want to migrate to, and it will automatically add the new API code and basically switch the API version over to something else. Okay. Other things we want to note in here is that in version 2 of the tools, you have to reference the external JavaScript files that we want added, into our particular project. Okay, now let's go ahead and keep moving through. What we want to do is just kind of get the hello world demo with V3 out of the way. Okay, now one of the things that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to add a new library, which is D3. Now, for various reasons, we don't support the latest version of D3 in the current version of the tools. And the reasons for that is dynamic module loading. And we'll look at that at the very end when we look at basically using the next version of the tools. But what we're going to do is we're going to install a new package here. So what I'm going to do is there is something inside of Visual Studio Code, which is the terminal. So what's nice about bringing up this terminal is that now you can issue NPM commands without having to go back out to the command line. So we're going to say NPM, and we're going to say install. And note that if you're one of the cool kids, you just say NPMI and NPM install are the same thing. So now what do we want to install? We want to install D3. But if we installed this, it would install the latest version. So we're going to say install D3 at 3, which basically says, give me the most recent version that starts with a 3. Okay, now that adds in the JavaScript library. Second thing we now need to do is we have to add in the type information. So what we're going to do is we're going to say add in at types D3 at 3. And then finally, we're going to put something in which is at save. Let's go ahead and run this right here. Okay, so we go ahead and run this. And one of the things that you're going to note is, up here in dependencies, because I had save, my project now knows that I need both the D3, the library as far as the JavaScript file that has to be loaded in, and then also the TypeScript definition files, so that when I write my TypeScript, it's strongly typed and I get IntelliSense and compile time type checking against those particular types inside there. Okay, now once I've done that, let's look at something. When we work with Node.js, there is this folder which is called Node Modules. Now, if I expand Node Modules down here, notice that when you add things, they get added to D3, Node Modules D3. If I go down here, I should be able to find this particular file. Let's go ahead and right-click, and I'm going to say copy relative path. And the reason for that is that we're going to have to go back to the PBI viz JSON file. And any other library that I want to use, the JavaScript library is not going to be loaded in unless I have that in externals.js. Okay, so we're going to go back here and we're going to go ahead and flip that switch, and we're going to flip that switch. And all of a sudden now I have things that are going to be added in. Now, one extra point, if I go to tsconfig, note that most of the TypeScript files that I want to use, have to be loaded in. However, if you have kind of the modern way to load in these TypeScript type definition files, if they're added inside the @types folder, they're automatically included in the compilation without you having to add them into files right here. And that's just something that's supported by the TypeScript compiler. Okay, so let's go ahead and close all this that we've done so far. And now that we've done that, we're going to go a little bit further. And let's start looking at the source files. Okay, so what we just looked at were kind of the project files that help us with the compilation and building the project visual. But now there's the visual.ts class. That holds the visual class definition itself. We have the settings.ts file. So that's a helper file. It's optional to use, but it assists you with dealing with persistent properties inside your visual. And then there's a visual.less. So less is a lot like stylistically awesome style sheets. If you've worked with .sass files or .scss files, you have kind of a CSS with a better syntax that allows you to do things like use variables and nested classes, but the tools are able to take it and just translate it to regular old CSS that can be loaded inside the browser. Okay, so let's say that now we want to author a very simple class. So let's go ahead and go back to our code here. And as I go back to my code, I'm going to go into source and not under D3, but top level. Let's go to the project. Let's open up our visual. Let's take all the junk they've given me and kind of reduce it down to this right here. Now, with the current tools, V2, every time you do anything to create a custom visual, you have to create a class inside the Power BI.extensibility.visual module or namespace. When we get to the V3 tools, that's going to change, and you're going to create a top-level class. Okay, so we have a class, and it implements an interface called iVisual. So notice that if I take away public right here, it's going to complain saying you have this one method that has to be implemented called update. Note that they really can't put a constructor in the interface, but still what's going to happen is your visual instance is going to be created by Power BI, and they're going to use this constructor and pass you something which is the options inside there. Okay, now what we'd like to do here is we'd like to do a couple different things. So, as a, for instance, let's go up top here and let's go ahead and add a couple different members to my class. Now, because we're using D3, we're working with SVG objects. So we have an SVG root. Let's say we have an ellipse object. We have a padding object inside there. Okay, the next step that we have right here is inside the constructor. We're going to need to do some one-time operations. So up above the constructor, I've created the fields to hold references to different elements. But now inside the constructor is when we go through and create these elements. Note that there is a options parameter. And if I say options element, that gives me the actual HTML element. That is the container that my visual is going to be, created inside of. So D3 has a select, works a lot like the jQuery function. And once you get that, now we can append an SVG. And once we have the SVG root, we'll add two objects, an ellipse and a text object inside there. Okay, now let's go ahead and take a look at this visual.less file inside here. The idea of the visual.less is it's just CSS. So let's go ahead and add some things inside there. So I'm going to create an ellipse, and I'm going to create a text element. So here, what you can see is that we can just go ahead and add these. Okay, it looks like Visual Studio Code is in the dark doesn't know that dominant baseline is a completely reasonable CSS property to use. Okay, but let's go ahead and save that. Now that we've done that, let's move back to the visual. And the last thing that we really need to update here, is what is inside of update. Now, inside of update, step number one is we want to take that SVG root. And what's going to happen is that people might take your visual and resize it. So we need to make sure that our root, goes right to the width and height of the viewport. Okay, now the next thing is somewhat optional. It's a design style I like, and that is let's go ahead and create a plot. So as we do all our work, I've got this kind of high level plot object, and it has the padding, it has a width, it has a height inside there. Okay, and now our next step, what do we want to do? We want to go ahead and create our first object. So here's an example of this.ellipse. We've got that inside there. Let's go ahead and do a little bit more work here. And the last thing that I'm going to throw inside there is just going to be something that's able to look in width and height. So we want to be able to adjust the font size as the visual gets small, but make the font size bigger as it gets large. Okay, so let's say that I take what we have right here. Let's go ahead and save our work. And now what we'd like to do is we'd like to go ahead and test things out. So we're going to go ahead and do a PBI viz start. And as I run PBI viz start, what you're going to see right here is that there is no such file. Let me go back here and debug what I must have done something silly inside there. And it looks like node modules D3. Let's go ahead and node modules and D3. And there is the library right now. It's the wrong place. Okay, one more time. Stop laughing at me, Chuck. Okay, let's go back here. And I think, as you use the get relative path, they give you the wrong thing. So I think I messed up before where I got rid of one but didn't replace it with the right one. Let's go ahead and hit save. Okay, let's see if we can get rid of this ugly error message with something a little bit better. Okay, so we'll go ahead and run this, and that's what we want. Okay, thank you for that unexpected surprise, gleeful cheer. So now it's running in the local debugger. So now what we need to do is let's go ahead and move back into Power BI. And the idea is you just need a report. Doesn't really matter what report, what workspace it's in. Now, before I go and open a new report, I'm also going to go to settings. So there is this special visual that we want to show up, which is the developer visual. And you have to turn it on a person by person basis. So now I've turned that on. Let's go back here to data sets. So I've got a data set. I can click on new report. So what we see right here is that if I click on the developer visual, hey, here's my visual up here. Note that update does not run until you add at least one thing, into a particular cell. Okay, and now it's added something, into a cell. And now I can start moving things around right here. And what's kind of neat about this is, let's go back here and things are running inside of the debugger. So let's say that instead of hello world, that's not quite good enough. Hello Chuck, and we'll put a couple exclamation points. And I'm going to hit Control S for saving. And note down below, it automatically rebuilt. So it has file watching. And so now we come back here and there's a little toolbar. I click on refresh and there's hello Chuck. And now let's go ahead and put it on toggle. And if I put it on toggle, and now we'll say, we'll switch over to Chaz and hit save. And now go back, and I didn't even have to update that. Now, you've kind of seen that I can change the TypeScript code. Let's go to the less file, light yellow. Okay, if we're dealing with Chuck, I've been in Chuck's closet before. That didn't come out right, but I know his fashion. We want to change to pink. We want to change this to green. So having this kind of instant feedback of being able to change your TypeScript and your styling and be able to go back and see it, gets to be an important part.
And I'll have you know, all that pink stuff's out of the closet now.
Okay, that's great. God, we probably have a lot of personal announcements to make next week in Tampa. Anyway, I digress. Let's keep going here. Now, when you start getting into working with visuals, you have to tackle the capabilities.json file. So here's an example. Let's say I move over here, and now in Visual Studio, I want to stop what I have there. So Control C. And it turns out that stopping the web server from running tricks a lot of people. Takes a little time to get used to that. But anyway, it's just Control C. Let's go ahead and open a different folder. So I want to look at some of the other things that I'm showing you. So if I go here under the Power BI Tools V2, let's look at one which is called One Big Number. Once again, just another example of a custom visual. Now, this one has a couple extra things inside there. And down here, what I'd like to do is I'd like to open up the the capabilities.json file. So first of all, you have these things that are called data roles. Now, let's go ahead and take my particular project right here. And once again, I'm going to bring up the tools. So I can say PBI viz start. And we'll go ahead and run this right here. If we get one of these problems saying I can't find anything, note that when you first bring down a project, I look at this particular project, it doesn't have a node modules folder. And the idea is that the node modules folder can get really large. So when I store stuff in source code and you bring it down to your machine, you're going to have to run the npm install command on a project, because that is what is going to fill up the node modules folder. Okay, so now I go down here, I refresh. Now the node modules folder has what it needs. So we'll come back here and we'll run what failed before, PBI viz start. And so now we go ahead and start up. Great. Okay, now if we look at capabilities.json, I want to look at a couple different things. In particular, there are 3 things in here that you have to come to terms with to really get any level of accomplishment. And those things are the data roles, the data view mappings, and the objects. So let's start with data roles. The idea of the data role is that's what we use to create the wells in the fields pane. So for instance, if we now look at the data roles in this project, we have a single data role called my single value. Now let's go back and create a new instance of the developer visual. And notice that you can see this well down here, my single value. So when you have my single value, you give it a name that you're going to refer to down below in other JSON in this same file. This name of my value is not used outside of this file. But then there's also the kind. So if you say measure, it means I can only put measures inside of this. So for instance, I have a couple of measures over here. Let's take sales revenue and add that inside. Great. Let's take a column. So I go to customers and I take something like a sales region and I add it inside here. And note that when you do that, it basically wants to summarize it. So it's treated, as a measure, which isn't always the great thing. You can also put grouping. And then there's one other setting that allows you to specify grouping or measure. So you can add either one inside there. Okay, now, next thing we're going to look at is, how the data mapping works. So we're going to look at 3 different examples of data mapping. And the idea is you're generally going to pick one. So with this first one right here, what we'd like to do is we're just trying to show a single number. I'll go ahead and add that inside there. So we don't need, a lot of values inside there. If I come back here and switch this to actual size, we can make it a little bit bigger. Okay, now, if I go back here and we drill into data mappings, what you can see here is for data mappings, conditions, for my value, we want a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 1. So what that means is if we have sales revenue in here. It can only take one. So if I take units sold, it's going to replace as opposed to adding, just because I have a max of one. Also, what's the data mapping we're going to use? We're going to use single in this case right here. Now, one of the things that's kind of neat is that if I look at this developer toolbar and say show data view inside here, and I start drilling down inside, note that one of the things that I can see in the data behind here is the single mapping. And there is this particular value. Okay, and then what is my column inside there? So not only can the single mapping show me what the value is, but now I can get metadata. What is the display name? So you can kind of see, sorry, I'm jumping around. If I go back over here, we kind of turn off the metadata view. I have something that is going to allow us, if I come back here, to either show the name or not show the name. Okay. So I'm going to show a couple examples. That was the single mapping example. Let's look at, another example right here. So what I'm going to do now is let's go quickly move from the demo that I just showed. And I'm now going to say open folder. And I realize that you want to stop the server as we move from one folder to another. Let's go ahead and open folder. This time we're going to open up the snazzy table. Okay, we'll open up the snazzy table. And so when I look at this one inside here, what I want you to see with this one is that we're going to have one data role, which is values. Now, let's go ahead and build this. So npm I, don't put install. The cool kids, really want you to put that I inside there. Now we're going to do the pbi viz start inside here. Okay, so let's go ahead and we've added this inside. So now let's go ahead and test this one out. So whenever I switch the visual that's running the debugger, it's just a lot more predictable if you delete and recreate the instance inside there. Okay, now you see we have a well called values. So let's say that we do something, such as add in the sales region. Okay, now after sales region, let's go ahead and add in a measure for sales revenue for units sold. Let's add a couple more things inside here, like profit. Let's go ahead and add product cost. Let's go ahead and try to add sales revenue running total. And notice that you can't add a 6-1 inside there. And so what I wanted to show here is that here, we're going to say grouping or measure, which says I want to allow the user to put either a column or a measure inside. And then also, I need at least one, but we're going to max out at 5. Okay, now in the last example, we used the single mapping. Now we're going to use the table mapping inside here. Now, let's go ahead and see how this is going to work inside. And what you're going to see here is that, there is the data. What many developers find to be very helpful is to, in the toolbar, go over to say show data view, come down inside here, and now you're able to see there's the table. There's single and categorical, but I don't care because this visual is just kind of tuned in for table. I go down into table, what are the actual columns? I can see what those are. If I want to get things like the formatting codes, I can get those. And then also for rows, I can get the data itself. Okay. And that's basically what's allowing me to kind of go through and start putting together the mapping inside. Okay. The last thing I'll show is a categorical view. If I basically move over to, what's used for most visuals, let's go ahead and do a open folder. And this one, we're going to open up the simple bar chart. And once again, we better do the npm I for install. Let's install the different files that are required for this project. And then we'll do the pbi viz start inside here. Okay, so now that we've got that, let's go back here and we're going to add this. And so now we have bar grouping and bar measurement. So once again, back here, let's go ahead and open up the capabilities.json file. So here under data roles, bar grouping, and I have my category. And notice that the top one, we want columns. The second one, we want measures. And notice that it doesn't stop you from putting a column into the well. It just does some weird things to it, such as try to sum it automatically, where that's not what we want to do. Okay, here we're basically going to say we want at most, one category and one. But now under categorical, we're going to say categories for and my category. And we want these values to be inside here. So if I now kind of look at how this is going to translate inside here, let's go ahead and put sales revenue into the measurement. I'll go ahead and put sales region, here. And now we'll go ahead and open this up inside here. Let's go ahead and get into the metadata inside. And so now what we care about is categorical. And so here are the categories. What are the categories? What are the values? You can see those right there. What are the actual values inside here? And as you look at values, you can kind of see that, each value, Western, is 12.7. Central is. So once again, you have, two different arrays. And in many cases, you have to kind of keep them, synced up, knowing that the first element in one array matches the first element in another array inside there. Okay, so being able to kind of work with those, gets to be important. Now, another thing that gets to be a recurring pattern is working with a data view. So in this particular sample right here, let's go ahead and jump back into our class. And so what I want to show right here is, let's go ahead and close some things up. There's options, there's update. And then you have this thing, which is the create data view. So up top here, we basically say when we have a bar chart, we're going to have data points. So let's create an interface. So for each one of these, I want to remember, what is the category, what's the string value, and what is the value. And now you have another interface for the model of the visual itself. So is it valid? What are the data points? Do we have strings, other things inside there? So the idea here is that when you're, needing to respond to update, we call create view model, which is going to go through there and do things like pull out the categorical categories. And now I can get the names of each category. I can get the values of each category inside there. And I can basically start building the points, for my view model. Okay. Now, let me move forward. And I'm kind of getting to I kind of want to get through the pre-beta stuff. So let's say I want to add custom properties. Custom properties get added into the capabilities.json file. And what you'll see here is that if I go back to capabilities.json, and now, under the data roles section and under the data view mapping section, I have objects. And the idea is that I can create an object. I've just named it bar chart properties. And now we can create properties that get persisted and rehydrated automatically by the runtime. Now, when you do this, what you're trying to do, is create this type of effect where someone comes back over here to the property sheet. And when they bring down properties, they're able to, take the bar car, change the color, change the font size to something else. Do we want to sort by size or do we want to sort alphabetically? Your choice inside there. Okay, now you've kind of seen, how things work. Just a quick word on, there is something which is the object, the data view object parser. And this can be used to, create a nice little helper class that makes it easier to persist properties back inside there. Okay, now this is something that it's an interesting topic. I could go a little bit further here, but I think what I want to do, since I have 15 minutes left, is to talk about the next version. Now, with the V2 tools, that's the one we've been using. What you'll see is that Power BI adds the API files, right into the project itself. The visual has to be in a certain namespace, and things are going to change completely in the next version of the tools. Now, one of the issues that we have is that the current version of the tools doesn't support dynamic module loading. So there's something which is known as ECMAScript 2015 modules. So in TypeScript, we did this big about face a couple years back. And one of the big moves was to be able to have one file reference two other files and have those files reference three other files. So your project really just had to know about the top file. And then through dependencies that we added into our source code, the system or whoever is building the project, the tools, are able to kind of find things on the fly. So when D3 introduced version 4, they had a requirement that your tools had to understand, how to dynamically load things in. So here's just kind of a quick high-level idea. Let's say I have app.ts. So now what we're going to start doing is we're going to start from our source file, app.ts. I'm going to say import quote from, and then I'll have another file, quote.ts. And so by pulling things in, once again, we kind of reduce the amount of references we have to have at the top level. Now, we're going to introduce one more tool, which is Webpack. So the new version of the Power BI tools are getting Webpack support, which helps it with the building. Now, let me go ahead and move over to another sample that I have. What I have here is I have this sample, which is called Learning D3. And so what I wanted to do is, this has nothing to do with custom visuals, but it can get you started into working with D3 version 5. So what you'll see here is that now, if I go to the very top of this, we're going to have a lot of import statements, import D3. Now, if I go ahead and I start this particular project right here, so if I want to start this project, it's going to be npm run start, just because that's the way that many of these projects that use Webpack work. So this is a project I wanted you to be able to load in and start using. And note that one of the things as a visual developer that you have to get good at, as the screen gets big or the screen gets small, that your work is able to adapt to that. Let's go back here and kind of take a look. Here I'm kind of building bar charts and kind of, adding things inside there. So if I click on this, also I've created a line chart just to kind of give you a starting point. But what you'll see is that there definitely are differences between D3 version 3 that we've been using. And we now move to the new world where we can use D3 v4. But by the time we got support for D3 v4, D3 v5 is already out. So we're going to use that instead. But one of the things that you'll see is that in the TypeScript, things like the type names get to be a lot different. Okay, so now I've got about 10 minutes left. It's probably enough time to kind of do the hello world with the new version of the tools. Now, what I'm also going to do is let's go ahead and I have the folder from before, and I did that very first demo, which is hello D3. So now this is going to be using the current version of the tools. Now, back here, let's go ahead and first thing that we're going to do is we're going to basically install the beta version of the tools to replace the current version. So here's what I ran before, but now we're going to say at beta. And so now it's going to do a global installation, of the beta tools. Let's go ahead and have this run for a second right here. After this runs, what I should be able to do is I should be able to check the version of PBI Viz, and it should start with a 3, not with a 2. Okay, note that you can have both versions running on the machine at the same time. So you have to basically replace the other one. Takes a couple minutes. It's not the end of the world. Also note that the certificates are not compatible between the two. So once this is done, I'm going to have to go ahead and reinstall the certificate that we're using inside there. Okay, it's taking a couple seconds. more than I thought to put this inside there. Okay, we're all done. If I now do a PBI viz and -v to say, show me what version, now we've got 309. Okay, so now let's go ahead and move back to where I was, just in custom visuals. So now PBI viz new. So we've already created hello D3. So this will be hello D3 V5. So we'll go ahead, we'll call new, and we're going to wait a second for this thing to run. And then just like before, we're going to do a CD and move over to that folder. Then code height or space dot, and we're going to open this up. Okay, so now let's go look at our source code inside here. We'll get rid of all this silly stuff that Chuck wrote at the top of this file right here.
Sorry about that, Ted.
And what you see is we no longer have that namespace inside there. Okay, another thing is, where is the API? You know, you compare the new world to the old world. In the old world, what we can see is the API is right inside of our project. In this new world, let's go ahead and open this up. There's no API in my project. Well, there is. Let's open package.json. So what you can see is now, starting with the V3 tools, the API is not code injected in your project. It's basically just code that you reference like any other package. You can also see some things inside here. So TS Loader, note that you don't see a lot about Webpack, but they are indeed using Webpack behind the scenes. Okay, now let's say that we want to step through and just do the hello world with D3 again. So let's go ahead and bring this up. And so this command is not going to be any different than what we did earlier. So it's going to be npm install, and we want to install D3. Well, actually, now we don't have to put the @3. We're just going to say install the latest version of D3 and @types/D3 and save. So let's go ahead and run that inside here. Now, once we go ahead and we run this, note that we now have these inside here. Now, let's go to PBI viz, and let me do a little work there. Note that currently when you create a new project, there's one little error that's going to happen, and that is that it references the dependencies.json file that isn't there. If you were working with R visuals, you'd need one of these. So for some reason, the project template does not add that file, but references it. So you can just kind of remove that reference. Okay, but now external JS, that's different. Here's the old world. I come back here, and if I open up PBI viz, you basically had to tell the building tool which JavaScript to inject in the distribution package. Now, you basically have something where if you're coming back up here, you know, here's hello world. What I want to do is, you know, let's say that, you know, we take that inside, and now we want to replace that with something different. Okay, I think I have a file here that I'm going to go steal something from. So if I now go to Tools, D3, and take this inside, just so I can kind of copy some hello world code inside here, what you're going to see is that now you're not going to get the styles inside there unless you import it. So because of Webpack, the TypeScript compiler is able to kind of take a .less file, and because of loaders and plugins with Webpack, it's able just to take this and push it into the JavaScript file that's being used. Okay, so you see there's a whole bunch of import statements, including import star from D3 inside there. Let's go ahead and save this work. Let's go ahead back here and do a PBI viz. And PBI viz start inside there. And so when this thing runs, table plugin is deprecated. This is all beta stuff. And also it says dependencies.json could not be found. And Chuck, this is one of the biggest problems that I have. And that is I make a change to a file, but I forget to save the file. Visual Studio always saves when you hit F5. This tool doesn't. Okay, one more time. Let's go ahead.
Can I disagree that that's your largest problems?
Okay, let's not get into the personal stuff, please.
All right, all right. No,
let's go ahead and see if I can now kind of end with a victorious demo. Might or might not work here. But now let's go back here. Let's go ahead and add this inside. Oh, and Ted forgot the most important thing. You know, what did I forget? I forgot that we have to redo the certificate. Okay, so if I was a really good teacher,
they're not compatible.
I did this on purpose. But now if we say PBI viz, remember we're using V3, note that down here we have install cert. So they decided that 2 steps that they added in the later versions, you know, of the previous tools are unimportant. You know, so now we'll say install cert. It does the same thing. You know, it just basically has you run, you know, 1 command instead of 2 commands to get to the same place. Okay, so let's go ahead and see if I can end with a victorious demo here. Current user, there are the tools. Go ahead, put the password in place. Go ahead and automatically select the certificate. No, we want to place it in this store right here. Let's go ahead, choose OK, choose finish. And now that we've done that, for good measure, you know, I think it's good to close down the browser as you change that. But now that we've kind of put the new one in place, let's go ahead and stop and restart the browser. Let's now go back over here, you know, into Power BI. Let's go ahead and open up a new report and use that particular visual right here. Okay, so data sets, we'll go ahead and create this. There is my visual inside there. You know, there is hello D3.
Woohoo!
And put things inside, but now things are kind of moving around inside. You know, but
yay, we got it working.
We got it working, exactly stuff. But you can kind of see that, you know, it's a very new world, you know, in the fact that the API is now just another NPM package that you install. Your class does not go in a namespace, but it's in the top level. And then we're doing things like, you know, adding imports, you know, both for the CSS and the .less file and for things, you know, inside of the API. Okay, so there's just kind of a quick look at the V3 tools that any month now, you know, should be coming out of beta and into preview. Okay, and so with that, Chuck, I'm now going to hand things back to you because I think I've gone through the things that I've wanted.
We got about 2 minutes left, and we have time for 1 question. And Devadovich, I think is actually his name, and I'm sorry I'm destroying your name, has a question about what's the best way of, or some best practices on distributing your custom visual. So you went through, you built it. How do you get people? How do you give it to people? How do they use it, etc.?
Let's see if, you know, is it possible that maybe we could answer that with a quick demo. So what you'll find is it's incredibly simple. So there is a PBI viz, and there is a package command. So let's say that, you know, we go ahead and we package this inside there. And so it is basically going to build the distribution file inside there. And what the distribution file is, when it comes back out here, is going to just be a PBI viz file. Okay. Let's not try it with the new tools. Let's go back here one more time and run the package command. And as we run the package command, you know, what we should get is, you know, it should build out our visual for us. And now we can take that and start using it in various places inside there. Okay. And now looks like there's some other thing that I need to work through to make this work. Okay.
But long story short, it's you package it up, you get the PB-viz file, and Bob's your uncle. It's not much more difficult than that for a non-commercial
Yes.
distribution.
I'd say there's very little that can go wrong if you've already built and tested. It really just is. And I should have demoed this before I switched over to the V3 tools.
Yep.
But basically just VBI Viz package gives you the file you want. Note that I could do testing before I package things up in the browser. But once I want to start testing things in Power BI desktop, then you have to build the package. Okay. But once again, I don't think there's a lot of complexity in building the package because it's all done for you behind the scenes.
Makes perfect sense. Ted, thank you very much. I will see you Sunday evening, and looking forward to our keynote. I need to hook up with Andre, and Andre actually does one of the largest commercial offerings of custom controls, the Zebra BI visual. So we'll actually get Andre back on, and we can actually ask him, in addition to what's new from them, what's it look like to actually make it a commercial offering. So thank you very much, Ted. You have a great day, and I'll see you Sunday.
Thanks, Chuck.